Tom Campbell here. If you find something of significant value in our videos, please consider supporting their production through our Patreon account or through a one-time donation. The links are in the description below. Thank you and enjoy the video.
Sure goes on to say, which animal in our PMR, our planet Earth, has the lowest entropy consciousness or the highest quality of consciousness?
Well, I don't know. I've never come across anything that specified that. You know, I've not tried to find that out. So as I just think about it, I don't know exactly. I can tell you pretty obviously which has the largest decision space. You know, who can create the most change and the most profound change. Well, that would be Homo sapien. Now, I mean, we can destroy the whole earth, you know, 5 totally different ways. You know, I mean, we can change everything here. We have huge changes we can make. So our decision space is big. There's all kinds of things we can do. We have learned to do much more than sit and watch sheep eat grass. You know, we've created technologies and cities and transportation and internets and things, and all of these things increase the number of possibilities that we have and the number of things that we can experience. So as far as having a large decision space, then human beings are obviously at the very top of the pile as far as critters go. But now, you know, there's other ways of looking at consciousness. There's, you know, we look at, you know, the avatar is basically a representation of the rule set. It evolved here according to the rule set. And the avatar defines the limitations of what the conscious can do within the rule set with that avatar. So you can say, you know, I can't, if I flap my arms, I'm not going to fly. Or I can't teleport, you know, I have to abide by the physics here that won't let me do those things because my avatar is not capable of doing those things. I can't jump 100 feet in the air. My avatar is just not equipped. It wasn't built to do that, so I can't do it. So consciousness can say, hey, Campbell, jump 100 feet in the air, and it's just not going to happen because the rule set doesn't support it. So that's what the physical body is. It basically defines what the conscious can do. So we have a bigger, more complex brain than many of the other critters. Okay, so that then allows, that evolved for us to be that way. So then that allows consciousness to do more particularly in the, you know, in the thinking realm and assessing and analyzing and judging realm, because we have that capacity according to the rule set that allows that to happen. All right, now you have some orca and some maybe extra big, you know, dolphins and some other things that are large mammals, whales, that have brains that are much bigger than ours. And they have, you know, frontal lobes that are more, I don't know, more detailed than ours. So it looks like they have the capacity to do a lot of processing from those brains. It's not just big because they're big. I mean, a dinosaur was big too, but they said it didn't have a pea-sized brain. It wasn't that smart. So if we look around and say, well, we're not the biggest brain thing on the planet. There's other things that have bigger brains than we do, which means consciousness in those critters is less constrained on some of the things that brain can do. That brain can do things, perhaps, that in spaces that ours can't get to. So now, you know, how do you work that in? What are they doing? You know, those whales in deep meditation, communicating with, you know, everything else in the oceans? Who knows? But they don't create changes in their environment. They're not building cities. They don't have, you know, arms and hands and tools that allow them to change things. So they don't have a huge decision space in the physical. Now, maybe they have a big decision space in the non-physical. I don't know. I've never investigated it to exactly, what they do with their consciousness. So I wouldn't know how to answer that question. I don't have that kind of information. And I really wouldn't know how to compare things. Making comparisons is always, got apples and oranges. You can't compare, what a orca's doing with what a human's doing. They're just, one's an apple, one's an orange, one's an apple, one's, a grapefruit. They're just totally different. And so I don't know that you could really make valid comparisons there, but other than to say that there may be other critters who provide avatars that are less constrained in some ways, but they're more constrained in other ways because they can't do as much. They don't have as much, as big a decision space as we do. So in that way, maybe some ways they're less constrained than us, and other ways I know they're a lot more constrained than we are.
And would that be the
choices.
same? And would that be the same as far as quality? Low entropy.
The way you grow up is by making choices. And if you have very meaningful, moral, complex choices, then you're going to grow up more than if your choices are real minor. If you're just in that big chat room we talk about and your choices are never real important. You can kind of say anything at any time and there's really no consequences for any of it. So without consequences, you don't grow up very quickly. You're just kind of static. So let's say you have a whale or a dolphin or something, and it has choices, of course, but does it have choices with severe consequences? Well, not so much in this reality frame. Maybe it's some other reality frame. It could be. Maybe the choices they make are not here, or someplace else in some other reality frame, some other way. I don't know. I guess it's not on my line. And I found out that if you are just inquisitive, a little bit of that is okay, but mostly you have to stay focused on what helps you grow up. That's the point of being here. That's what you're here for. The rest of the stuff ends up being conjecture and hand waving and stuff that as long as it's done mentally, then it's done in a subjective space. And in a subjective space, it will never be an argument that many people can take seriously. So you just kind of forget about it. It's just not that important.
Okay, I see what you're saying there. We'll go on to the next question. Since we are able to see in Mpmr, and that's non-physical matter reality, does Mpmr also have a speed of light as part of its rule set? If yes, I would presume Mpmr's speed of light would be faster than ours. Does each Mpmr have a different value for their speed of light? And is this value unique to each Mpmr?
Okay. Light is not fundamental. Light is just something that's in this physical reality according to this rule set. There really is, this is a virtual reality. There is no light. There's only computation here. In a virtual reality, everything's computed. So there really is no light. There's only computations that work as if they were light. We compute things as if there were light and as if light traveled at a certain speed. Now, light travels the speed that it does here because it goes 1 pixel of distance for 1 pixel at a time. And that's as fast as you can move through this reality frame. If you can move your location 1 pixel in 1 delta t. If you move your position 10 pixels for every delta t, well, now you're teleporting. You're disappearing from one and reappearing 10 pixels over. That's not allowed. So in our virtual reality, in order to keep it a good virtual reality with consistent consequences. We don't let things teleport around, just disappear here and appear someplace else. That makes this place too squirrely. It wouldn't be a good learning lab if it worked like that. So it can only go, they have to be contiguous pixels, 1 pixel and 1 delta t. That's the speed of light. Take that distance, delta t, 1 pixel of distance, or 1 quanta of distance, and divide that by the 1 quanta of time, or 1 pixel of time, and that's the speed of light, distance over time. So that's as fast as anything can travel through our virtual reality. And that ratio of a delta x over delta t defines the resolution of this reality, defines the pixel size, or it defines the ratio of those pixel sizes, not the pixel sizes actually. So if we want to increase the resolution here, because people are digging deeper and deeper and deeper into physical reality, then what we can do is increase delta t, decrease delta t, make it smaller, and decrease delta x by the same amount, and then the ratio stays the same. So now we have smaller delta t and smaller delta x, but the ratio still stays the same. That speed of light's a pretty important constant that we don't want to change a whole lot, but as it turns out, it's digital. You can't just divide each of them by a constant and have them stay the same ratio. You can only change delta t within increments. It's digital. You can only change delta x within increments. So you can get the 2 increments of smaller things that have as close to the same ratio as you can, but you can't make it exactly the same, because you can't just divide by a number. It only goes down in chunks, whole chunks, not pieces of chunks. You can't say, well, we'll take 1.5 pixels. There is no 1.5 pixels. There's only 1 pixel or 2 pixels or 3. You never get half a pixel. That's the whole point. That's what I mean by digital. So when you make that new ratio that gives us a higher resolution, you can get very close to that old value of C, because these are very small pixels. So the fact that you're plus or minus a pixel is only going to make a little bit of difference in the 10th or 12th or 14th decimal place. But there it is. You'll have that difference. And sure enough, our speed of light has changed in those small decimal places over time. And that's because I think that for a long time, we could have larger pixels because we weren't digging that deeply into our reality. We weren't measuring things that very small. And because of that, you don't need such high resolution, because high resolution just means more computer processing. So if you're a smart computer scientist, you don't use any more resolution than you need to run the simulation that you need to run. So as we got more digging into things, then quite literally, we needed more resolution. So the speed of light just shifted a tiny little bit, because we had to get, well, it's somewhere between this pixel and this pixel would make it come out perfect, but we can't do that. We either have to take the ones a little bigger or the ones a little smaller. So we picked the closest one, and that's it, you see. So we've actually seen that, where the speed of light changes slightly.
There is, yes, Rupert Sheldrake discovered that, I think in 1948, that the speed of light, which was thought to be an exact constant, did fluctuate. And you said, you had commented on that it was possibly for a particular reason, and that is something to do with needing to have a higher resolution.
Yeah, that's when our science was getting to the point that we were looking at very small things. That's when we were first putting together, atomic accelerators and other sorts of things that we could bang particles apart and do other sorts of things. So yes, that would be a time that the resolution would have to go up a little bit. And I can see that that's probably happened, several times. I don't suppose it's just once. It's probably happened 2, 3, 4 times. You probably have seen the resolution go up. And right now, physicists have come up with a thing called Planck time and Planck width. Well, Planck time is what I'm roughly taking as my delta t, and Planck width is what I'm roughly taking as my delta x. So if you take the Planck distance and the Planck time and divide them, you get c, the speed of light. So sometimes in physics, some physics, depends, you're kind of getting into the philosophy end of physics with this. It's not, this is not necessarily facts as it is philosophy, but physicists will often say that Planck time is that small a time where time becomes granular, and Planck width is that small a distance where space becomes granular. Well, granular space and time, of course, is a simulation. That's the way simulations are. They come in they get granular at that level. So yes, so where are we? We just diverging around, or are we talking about a question here?
Yes. Does the real question she had was, does each Mpmr have a different value for the speed of light?
Yeah, it could. Every Npmr is not really a simulation. Npmr is just defined as not here. So we have the viewpoint of the avatar. Okay, that's my body's viewpoint. The viewpoint of the avatar is that I have this thing we call the physical universe. Yes, it keeps expanding and growing and doing things and changing all the time, but we have that, and that's our reality, PMR. Okay, now anything that's not a part of this physical universe is, by definition, NPMR. In other words, to the avatar here, it's non-physical. It's not part of this virtual reality. We define this virtual reality called the physical universe as our reality. So if it's not in this reality, then that's NPMR. So NPMR is really not so much a place as it is not here. So it's everywhere else. Everything everywhere else is in NPMR from our perspective. So that's where that comes from. It's you have to come up with names for things, otherwise it's hard to talk about them. So, but that's where NPMR is not non-physical. Well, what's physical? There is nothing that's physical. Physical is just a computation. There is no physical. So non-physical means that it's not part of what we call our physical reality, which is this virtual reality called physical universe that we call from our perspective. So NPMR doesn't have a speed of light. There's nothing going on there. It's just not here. It's everywhere else. It's non-physical to us. So now within the larger consciousness system, you may have other PMRs. Okay, it's a big computer. So you can have more than one simulation running at a time. Our computers do that. Our computers can, cordon off a piece of memory and processors and so on and go off and run simulations, and we can do that. And big university computers that have a lot of people in the university running on them probably have, many hundreds of things going on all at the same time. Every department pretty much that's technical and needs a computer has their students and their faculty down there putting jobs into that computer, and it runs all of them, most of them simultaneously. They all share. Well, it's like that here too. So the system can say, all right, here's a virtual reality we're computing, and here's the rendering engine, which I call the big computer. And now there's this even bigger computer that is maybe rendering other things. And each one of those may have their own big computer. All those other reality frames may have their own big computer. And each one has its own delta T and delta X depending on what's necessary. If they need a lot of resolution, then their speed of light, might be different. or they picked a different ratio for one reason. That speed of light is one of those constants that works really well, and you don't want to monkey with it too much because a lot of things depend on it. So would they have exactly the same? No, I don't think so. It's not like one of the big astrological constants. It's more local, if you will. So another virtual reality, even if it had a similar rule set, may run on a different clock altogether. Their delta T that they compute could be much bigger or much smaller than ours, depending on what that VR needed for its players. So yes, every virtual reality will have its own. Now, there's other reality systems beside things that look like physical realities. There's the dream reality. There's the transition reality. There's the out-of-body reality. There's all these other realities that are not really like physical realities. They're different than that. You can teleport around in them. They don't have a very tight rule set that defines everything. Everything that defines with a physical causality. Everything in our rule set is some chain of physical causality. That's what our rule set does. It makes everything well defined. Well, if you can have a rule set that doesn't do that, more in consciousness space, you can have dreams, you can teleport around, you can just go from one place to another, you can change things, you can just wave your hand and monsters will disappear, or fires will start or stop, or all kinds of stuff going on in a dream reality. People come and go, things change, what looks like a werewolf once, becomes a little baby next. And it's very metaphorical, it's symbolic. It's in symbol space, not physical space. It's in metaphor space, not 3D space, more like metaphor space. So in those kinds of things, you're talking about if you can experience, anything you can experience is a virtual reality. It's a data stream. You interpret the data, and how you interpret that data then becomes your experience. So any reality frame in which you can experience, and you can experience in an out-of-body reality, then it's a virtual reality. There's a data stream defining it. So think about the body as a single player virtual reality game. Whereas here we're in a big multiplayer game. This is a high resolution game with a tight rule set. Out of body, not so much. There isn't really a different light speed. Light isn't defined outside of this virtual reality. Light's not necessarily defined. So when you are in the out-of-body reality, you get to see things. Well, you don't have eyes, but you interpret things as if you see them. You interpret them through our physical senses, and partly we do that because in order to think about things, we need language. In order to remember things, we need language. We need to be able to express what we've seen. And all of our languages have been made to describe this virtual reality, to describe our physical experience. So we tend to, if we see something, then it's just that we're interpreting that data as sight. We're not seeing it with eyes. So it's not like it's really there and there must be light there so that we can see. The only reason I can see things in an out-of-body reality is because somebody's shining a light on them. It doesn't work like that. That's just a physical thing. Once you get outside of a virtual reality that's physical, like with a tight rule set, seeing and hearing and smelling and feeling are totally different things. They're just interpretations that we make in terms of our sense data, because we don't know any other way to do it. That's how we're trained to interpret things. We interpret things in terms of our sense data. So we do that everywhere. So we get a data stream on this single player game with a larger conscious system, and we see things and we hear things and we use language and we use all the same things we do here because that's how we interpret data. But it doesn't mean that there's any light out there. Light is an artifact of the calculations done here. Information moves in consciousness, right? We send information, we get information, we receive data streams. Well, just the concept of that would seem that there is time. because the word receive is, means something was there and it's coming here, it's moving. Well, the concept of motion in space is a concept that applies to this physical reality. In consciousness, there is no space, there is no distance. Our concepts of receiving a signal and interpreting it are all time-based and space-based. We see a signal coming from there to here, and then we take the time to process it. And after we process it, we can talk about it, and then we have language and speech, and all of that has to be done in time sequence. Whereas when you actually get a telepathic transmission or something that comes to you, when you get a data stream, it just comes in a big chunk. Just all of a sudden, you're aware of knowing stuff that you didn't know before. It just, you get a paragraph or a chapter or a book just all at once, bingo, and you've got it. So it's not really time-wise. So asking about time in the non-physical is kind of an odd thing, or asking about light or the speed of light. Speed goes back to time. It's not really a place. There is no measurement. It's a not here. So you think that, well, if there's communication, then there must be a delay. Well, that's just the way we think, because that's the way it works here. And we can't think about it any other way, because anything else is just nonsense to us, doesn't make sense. But because there's no space there, then you can get a how we call it, telepathic, or a mind-to-mind communication seems to be instant. And that's been shown with astronauts out in space and so on, that there is no lag, and there is no lag in doing things that are very far away. You get it instantly. Whereas if you have a speed of light, a radio signal, there's a little bit of time between here and there. But that's because it takes light or electromagnetic waves that long to move. But we don't find that in consciousness. Now, our system updates every delta t, which is roughly 10 to the minus 44 seconds. It's very small. That's the Planck time. It's really not that. I just rounded up to a nice even 10 to a nice even power, so it'd be easy to remember, but that's close. It's in that neighborhood. And that's a very small time. So we update very, very quickly. At least some parts of the map we can update very, very quickly. We don't have to update everything in the same way, but we do some of it very quickly. So this idea that messages take time to move is just us stuck in the way things work here. We don't really know how that works. Conscious to consciousness, it's like it's all one big consciousness, and things move around there instantly. Now, that makes physicists say things, oh, it must be entanglement, because entanglement is one of the things that something here can change something there rather instantaneously, or at least within one delta t. But that doesn't necessarily mean it has anything at all to do with entanglement. It's something totally different. What is consciousness? You see, that's why we can't answer that question exactly. We can say, what are its attributes? Consciousness is awareness. It's what is awareness? Well, it has to be awareness of something. That something then is described by data. So we can come up with some basic things that are its attributes and how it must work, but we don't really know what it is. And if we try to make it something that is physical or acts like physical things, I think that's probably, hand waving, not too credible arguments. I think we just leave it at we don't know. Now, is it really instantaneous? Now, I say in my book that every level up that creates another lower level. Now, the speed of things has to be faster in that level that creates, because it can't create something that goes faster than it can. So what creates this virtual reality has to have a speed faster than the delta t in this reality. You couldn't have the server of this reality couldn't have a processor time that was much slower than the delta t that our reality moves at. It couldn't do it, you see? So anything that computes something else, the thing computing it has to have a faster clock time than the thing that it computes. So if you figure that this consciousness computes this, then consciousness has a smaller delta t, higher frequency, a faster time clock than we have. It also needs a time clock because it orders things. Ordering in time, called sequencing, is an important technology for differences, and it has to have its own clock. So the master clock, the clock that has the smallest delta t, or the clock that has the highest frequency, has to be fundamental consciousness. That's the LCS's clock. Has to run faster than anybody else's because it creates virtual realities that then can't go faster than itself. So they can be slower. So if it creates 10 different virtual realities, they can all have their own clock speed. But none of those clock speeds can be faster than the one that creates it, which is the larger conscious system. So that system has the highest speed. Now, is that speed finite? Probably. But if it is, it's a whole lot smaller delta t than Planck time. Probably by billions and billions, probably, many billions, maybe a billion times faster than the Planck time, which is our delta t. Well, that means when it's computing us, it's got a whole lot of cycles where it can do things between our cycles. So when it has to compute the next delta t here, it's got billions and billions of computer cycles that it can run between every cycle that it has to update this virtual reality, which gives it some margin for having to figure things out between delta t's. It's got a lot of margin, maybe a whole lot of margin. But that's really, as far as time goes in the different places and different reality frames, that's kind of the picture there. Anything that computes something else, that's something else that gets computed, has to run at the same or a slower time, as the reality that created it. So other than that, it's hard to say what time is anywhere, other than that the reality will have the fastest clock, the smallest tick, and probably by a pretty wide margin of any place else. And all the other realities can be on their own clock, as long as they're equal to or less than the master clock in the LCS.
Tom Campbell here. I and MBT Events hope you liked this video. We now have well over 1,000 hours of free video on this user-friendly, ad-free YouTube channel. Though these videos are free to our viewers, they represent many thousands of hours in production and editing, and many thousands of dollars invested in video and audio equipment, along with the required computers and software to store and process the raw video into finished products. So far, all of this content has been funded directly out of our own pockets. Be assured, we will always continue to do what we can. It's our life, our purpose, a labor of love that we will continue to pursue as best we can. However, those pockets are not as deep as they used to be. Thus, we are now seeking to augment our resources with support from our viewers. If you find something of significant value in our videos, please consider supporting their production through our Patreon account or through a one-time donation. The links are in the description below. Thank you.